At the start of this month, the VR Game Jam hosted by YouTubers Valem and VR with Andrew was held. In it, you were given 7 days to make a VR game based on a theme announced once the jam started. For this jam, I decided I'd go with Unity because there's quite a few tutorials on VR development using it, especially ones posted by the hosts themselves. In fact, I only discovered the jam because VR with Andrew posted a video on it about a month before it started. Lucky me. However, I was a bit nervous, as I had not used Unity in nearly a year at that point, and even when I had, well, let's just say I was far from proficient with it. So while the days ticked down, I began to learn more about VR development through their videos, as well as redoing a demo for a game that I had last used Unity for. But soon enough, the day came. The theme would be announced at noon where I live, so this would give me about half a day to come up with an idea and start testing it before I went to bed. As the timer counted down, I was frantically checking the previous themes to try and imagine what this year's theme might be. But before I knew it, the timer reached 0. Then -1, and then -2? What? But after nearly a minute of anxious waiting, the theme was finally shown. One tool, many uses. And I'll be honest, I was stumped. I mean, one tool was simple, but many uses? How much should many be? I mean, what kind of tool have many uses? There's a pocket knife, of course, but that seems like a lame concept for a game. What in the world has many uses? I mean, maybe I could do hands. You can do a lot with those, but I don't know that much about VR development to do a lot with that. Sword? I mean, you can use that to kill things, but I could also make it like the Keyblade from Kingdom Hearts. But what would the key part do? I mean, I'll unlock things, of course, but then I'd have to make like a puzzle fighting game, which seems weird to me. Staffs? The staffs, I mean, you can do just about anything with magic, so that was certainly an option. Killing things, spawning things, moving things, these are all options for the staff idea. Plus, I could be Gandalf, which would be cool. I got stuck on this option for quite a while, but in the end it just didn't feel right to me, so I didn't do that. And while moping about that, the idea of spy tools popped into my head. I mean, those things are literally designed to have several purposes, you know? I mean, more specifically, the umbrella was front and center in my mind. I recalled a clip of the movie Kingsman: The Secret Service that I'd watched on YouTube only like a week earlier that used it in a fight scene. And I would show that here, but I do not trust my luck to not immediately get a strike. And just like that, I found my idea. I mean, look at my face right there. That's a man with a plan. So with the umbrella idea, there was the umbrella sword, the umbrella gun, and the umbrella shield. Plus, the pommel could have like a gem on the end of it, and then it could be a staff. I mean, that was it. That was exactly what I needed. It contained everything that I had thought about before. Now that I finally got the tool in mind, I got to work. Using a reference, I quickly modeled an umbrella, which may or may not have ended up looking a bit like a frosting piping bag. Oops. And with that modeled, I quickly booted up Unity, imported the Steam VR plugin, and created a basic little scene. Then I added in the umbrella model and got it to shoot out bullets. However, these bullets would never despawn, so I had to ensure that they did, just in case the player went a little overboard. Whoops, that's not what I wanted. And after a tiny little tweak, they finally disappear. Next up, I added the ability to switch between umbrella modes. I remembered a method called the finite state machine from my older games and looked up some videos for it. Let's see how that worked out. Yeah, I couldn't quite figure that out, and I didn't want to have to learn something completely new in the middle of a game jam, or as Pixel Prophecy would say.
So yeah, just do the stuff you know you can do best and focus on that.
However, while researching FSMs, I saw a tutorial which used enums. You know, enums are great at serving as basically a list of things that never change values, although they're not an actual list. And for my use, I would have an enum which contained the states of gun, sword, shield, and staff. It was then easy to declare a variable which sets itself to one of the states of the enum, and then use a basic switch statement to find out which state is currently active. But this is something that I would put off until tomorrow. For now, I chillaxed and took a bit of a nap, which turned into a very long nap. Waking up at 12 a.m. sharp, I decided to remodel the umbrella to actually have an option to be all 4 modes. After importing that model back over to Unity, I quickly got it to change between modes, and after that, I used Steam VR's attachment offset variable to be able to hold the umbrella properly. And with all that done, I finished for the day and went back to sleep. Now day 2 was a slow day for me, with very little actually getting done. At the start of the day, I added in an enemy that constantly looks at the player and shoots. This took me several hours of trying to find out how to actually make them rotate towards the player's direction, and even more, it took me another several hours to get the enemy's bullets to also shoot in the direction of the player. I really don't know why this took me so long, but it did, and it was frustrating. But after finally getting both of those figured out, I began working on the shield mode, as every other mode would be quite easy to implement. Hopefully. Now the shield needed an actual function, so I made the enemy's bullets destroy themselves if they hit the umbrella. There may have been a tiny bug with their bullets, in which they would constantly go towards the player, which would create like a little ring of bullets around them, but this was fixed by simply moving their velocity line from the update function to the start function, which I really should have done from the beginning. And finally, at the end of the day, I re-added the gun mechanic to the new model. For day 3, I wanted to work more on the enemies. I added health bars to them following a wonderful tutorial from Dapper Dino on YouTube and made sure they took damage from player weapons. Now, the gun mode would be easy as all it took was checking if the bullet prefab collided with the enemy. However, the sword mode took an eternity, and this is due to the fact that once the player picks up the umbrella, it becomes a child of the hand that picked it up, and this messes with the on-collision enter function as it only detects the parent object. However, I didn't want the enemy to lose health if it hit with the player's hands. After some time, I then realized that I could actually change the on-collision enter function to on-trigger enter to get the collision of the umbrella. Simply put, I'm very dumb. Next up, I added a reload timer to the gun mode with a cool little reload circle UI by following a tutorial by YouTuber Zonlib. To end the day off, I tried adding an extra function to the shield mode by creating a wind pad that would boost the player upward if they were in that mode. However, because there was no rigid body attached to the player or anything like that, they would never come down. And I couldn't really add a rigid body or anything to the player because it would just screw up the movement. So no wind pad for me, I guess. Now day 4 was a very bittersweet day for me. On one hand, I was groggy and tired pretty much the entire day. On the other hand, it was one of, if not my most productive days, oddly enough. I woke up later than usual and decided to do the hand skeleton for the umbrella to make it look like you're actually holding it. Now this required 2 models, one for the staff mode and one for the other 3 modes. Then I just needed to switch between these 2 modes, which was harder said than done. This is due to the script for the skeleton showcasing one of them as the main hand, as it's often used for things like pulling a trigger, not switching between different positions entirely. At first, I tried having 2 different skeleton scripts and turning one off and the other on. However, this approach didn't work like I'd hoped, and it would only stay with the first one. After a while, I finally figured out that I could just use the blend option and have it set to either 0 or 1 for the position I wanted. Also, using the hand skeleton mode gets rid of the need for the attachment offset from earlier, which was very handy as it's way easier to copy hand positions from the right hand to the left hand, as before it would completely mess up and the left hand would be holding it upside down. With the staff mode finally being usable, I started working on its mechanics. First things first, I added a line that shot from the jewel to the ground to showcase where you'd be shooting. This took some trial and error, but I ended up using a raycast that shot forward from the gem and then took the start position and the end position of that raycast to set aligned render's start and end positions, which was really cool. With the line being shown, I added in another reload timer for the staff mode too. Now with the reload timer, I needed something to actually reload, so I implemented a little explosion that would hurt enemies. However, that's not much of an explosion, so after another little nap, I redid the explosion to actually look like one. Following that, I realized that having multiple enemies shooting at you ensured that they all shot at the exact same time, which kind of just broke your immersion. So I tried to make sure that they would shoot only a percentage of the time. Trying this, a very interesting problem occurred. When I used C#'s system.random value to create the random variable, it basically acted as a static variable, meaning it was the exact same for every instance of the shooting enemy, or at least for most of them. Every once in a while, 2 or 3 of them would have a different value. But when I switched to Unity's random.range function, every instance gained its own value. So I'm not sure exactly how system.random gets its value, but it seems to perhaps get it based on the time or something like that, and perhaps those 2 or 3 that were different were called just like a millisecond before or after the others. Then again, I'm no professional here, and I could be completely wrong, just thought it was interesting. Now with that out of the way, I fixed an issue that had plagued me from the beginning. With SteamVR's basic setup, you have to hold down the trigger button to hold onto an object. Now this makes sense for the most part. If you're holding like a ball, you want to be able to drop it. But it gets very tiring when you're holding the same object for a long period of time, and you want to press another button, like the grip button, which is on the side of the controller. Now I managed to get it to just be held once you press the trigger by highlighting out all of the detach functions from the built-in interactable and throwable scripts. This was, however, a very bad way to do this, and an issue that I would fix later. But, at the same time, it was great! It allowed me to also use the trigger button as the fire button, instead of the annoying grip button, which caused me a bunch of hand pain. Now for day 5, I took a bit of an off day. At this point, I thought I had most of the mechanics done, and I really only needed to make levels. I felt like it was possible to, take a bit of a break. But before I did that, I needed to implement a movement system. Yep, up until now, there was no way to move around in-game. Following one of those VR tutorials from the beginning, I implemented a quick locomotion system. And after finishing that, I took the rest of the day off. While going to sleep for the night, I realized that because the locomotion system I just implemented had a falling system, I could also now re-implement the wind pad I did from day 3, which was fun. Now day 6 was another productive day, although not as close as day 4. Before anything, I had a friend come over to playtest what I had already. While playing, he tried a few tricks, such as scooping things up in shield mode and shooting things in gun mode to move them, which I hadn't even thought about. After some more messing around, he left and I got back to work. I made it so that when in shield mode and falling, you would fall slower than usual. And with that finished, I added back in the wind pad, and it worked. It shot you up and you would fall slowly back to the ground. I did another quick redesign of the umbrella, mainly the open umbrella, as it looked horrible and it was quite bad and casted nasty shadows in Unity. Plus, I added color to all the parts to make it look nice. I then fixed an annoying issue where your hands would collide with the player controller by just making the player controller size basically 0. Not actually 0 though, as that would cause some very weird issues. And while messing around, I found myself thinking about the Portal games. Now this was due mainly to the texture used by ProBuilder, which I was using to create levels. Had a very much Portal-like feel to it. So with that inspiration in mind, I re-downloaded Portal 2 and started playing some custom levels there. Now I came out after a few hours with some ideas. I started to think about making 3 levels. 1 for each mode, excluding the shield mode, as that would be used for every level. But before I could start on the levels, I needed to make a tutorial level. Though whether it was tiredness or something else, I began to get really demotivated. I had only one more working day to create 3 fun levels with the systems I had in place. But these systems just weren't that fun. And at this point, I nearly quit. But out of pure self-spite, I persevered and went to bed for the night. Day 7 was Thursday and my final working day. I started off the day fairly energetic. I finished up the tutorial level and then went to brainstorming level ideas. After spending nearly 4 hours trying things, I just couldn't make anything fun with what I had. A talk hosted by Rami Ismail popped into my head.
Do you have any idea what you're making? Like, not just like, do you know what you're making, but do you really know what you're making?
And I finally realized that I had messed up big time. I went into this all without any real gameplay in mind, just a few mechanics. And this is a horrible, horrible way to do a game jam. And I quit. Or did I? While going to bed, and once again moping in my own sadness, a level design finally popped into my head. I got up, went to make coffee, and got to work. One level. It was all I needed. I had less than 12 hours to make it. Safe to say, I think I went ham. Under a tired haze, I spent nearly 4 hours making a level until I could barely stay awake anymore. Finally, I'd done it. I could join the jam again and submit my project. Or could I? Well, as it turns out, I couldn't figure out how to actually get the movement system to export along with the build, even with default settings. And with no movement system, there was no game to publish. With one last futile attempt, I rebuilt the game again and tried to make it work, only to see it fail. And that was it. The universe was telling me to stop, and I finally gave in. I once again quit the jam and went back to bed, this time soundly knowing that, even though it wouldn't be published, there was at least an actual level there that was playable, if not only in Unity's editor. In the end, I have bittersweet feelings about this game jam. You know, I was able to technically make a game, but it just wasn't exactly playable or fun. Anyways, I do feel as though I've learned a lot through this. First thing, plan your game. What was I thinking? Second thing, I did go into this not expecting some amazing game. I'm far from a professional with Unity, but I am very surprised with how much I did manage to do with VR, something that I was entirely new to. Especially compare this with my old Lukrembo 41 game from 2 years ago, and there is a big improvement. Maybe not much for 2 years, but I haven't exactly been using Unity for those 2 years. But using Unity again has been a fun experience, and I do plan on doing a bit more with it in the future. No real game per se, but more of an interesting demo, much like the YouTuber Sebastian Lake does. I don't know if I pronounced that right. Thank you to the host for making a wonderful jam, and congrats to all those who participated. The games published were really fun to play, and I may take part in this again, but that remains to be seen.